What if the deadliest secret in Westeros grew up sleeping under the same roof as Cersei Lannister? Not hidden in the snows of the north, but in the humid dark of the Red Keep, where every corridor has ears and every shadow belongs to someone on a ledger of favours and debts. Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell in one history, becomes something quieter and more dangerous in this one. He is either Robert's acknowledged get, paraded as proof of the king's virility, or Ned Stark's solemn royal ward, a boy whose name carries Stark blood into the capital without a title to anchor it. The distinction matters less than the setting. The howling winds of Winterfell are replaced by the heavy, salt-thick air of Blackwater Bay, seeping through open windows. The crunch of snow underfoot gives way to marble floors that remember every step and every whispered insult. In Winterfell, he learns honour by watching a father. In King's Landing, he learns survival by listening before he speaks. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. Cersei Lannister understands this, and she understands that armies begin as boys who grow up near power, watching kings eat, drink, and stumble. So she watches this northern bastard at her table, this quiet shadow who shares corridors with Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. She sees the way Robert's hand falls a little heavier on his shoulder after a hunt. She notes the way Barristan Selmy corrects his grip on a practice sword with a patience never shown to her son. She tells herself she has merely miscalculated if she ever thought one bastard more or less would not matter. Varys does not make that mistake. The spider measures this boy the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, weighing his worth in silence. Stark blood, possible Baratheon blood, and beneath that, a truth even he only suspects at first, the faint echo of a different dynasty's fire. Littlefinger, ever alert to undervalued assets, marks the same quietness, the same habit of standing at the edge of the hall, watching the currents of the court instead of splashing in them. He sees a bastard with no clear place, and a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. This is not the brooding outcast of the north, dreaming of the wall and the honour of a black cloak. This Jon is shaped by the King's Guard's drills in the yard, by overheard arguments between Hand and Queen, by the smell of wine on a king who does not deserve his throne. He learns that power is not in the words of oaths, but in who commands the gold cloaks at dusk. He understands early that a name can be both shield and target. The stakes are simple and devastating. A true Targaryen heir, raised in the capital, trained in politics instead of northern austerity, can rewrite everything. The War of the Five Kings, Daenerys Targaryen's invasion, even the timing and shape of the fight against the dead beyond the wall. Every alliance shifts. Every betrayal acquires a new edge, when the most dangerous claim in Westeros grows up under Lannister eyes. In the chapters ahead, we will move slowly and precisely through that new history, tracing how each bond, each battle, each quiet decision in the Red Keep bends the fate of the realm away from Winterfell and toward King's Landing. In Westeros, crowns are costumes, armies are arguments, but children are investments. The robes fray, the banners burn, yet the child with the right blood and the right story outlives both. Put Jon Snow in King's Landing, under the painted ceilings of the Red Keep instead of the grey skies of Winterfell, and he becomes the most dangerous investment on the board. This is not a tale of destiny. It is a balance sheet. Assets and liabilities, risk and return, tallied in ink that is very often blood. Rather than asking whether Jon grows into a nobler man or a darker one, this ledger asks what his presence does to everyone who thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Tywin counting hostages, Varys weighing stability, Cersei hoarding her children's worth as if each golden head were a locked coffer. Seen through those eyes, Jon is not a brooding boy with a sword. He is a variable. To Tywin, a northern hostage who can be married, traded, or killed to discipline the Starks. To Varys, a potential answer to the question that keeps him awake beneath the Red Keep. how to pass the realm intact to the next generation when the current king drinks, the queen schemes, and the small folk starve. To Cersei, once she hears even a whisper of Targaryen blood, he is a blade pressed to the throat of her dynasty. Power, legitimacy, perception. That is the true trinity of this story. In the canon timeline, Jon learns honour first and power last, raised where names matter more than crowns and oaths are heavier than gold. In this one, he grows in rooms where a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, where legitimacy is a tale told by maesters and high septons, and where perception can be sharpened into a weapon more lethal than Valyrian steel. Which of those three he learns to value first changes everything. A Jon who is taught that power feeds armies, that armies feed kings, will not look at his own name or the truth of his birth in quite the same way as the boy who once dreamed only of a black cloak on a frozen wall. A Jon who sees how quickly the court can turn on a bastard with the wrong rumours will understand that perception must be managed, or it will be managed for him. So we will move through this altered history as a careful accountant would, column by column, year by year. First, his early childhood in the Red Keep, the nursery politics beside Joffrey, Myrcella and Tommen. Then the quiet education of a royal ward, the Kingsguard steel that shapes his sword hand, and the courtiers who try to shape his loyalties. From there, the ledger widens to war. Robert's death, Robb's rebellion, the question of whether Jon is hostage, ally or rival when the banners rise. And beyond even that, the long game. Daenerys sailing west, dragons over Blackwater Bay, white shadows gathering in the far north. Each phase will show whether those who gamble on this boy have chosen wisely, or whether, as so often in King's Landing, she has merely miscalculated, trusting that a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. In the next chapter, we begin where all investments begin, with a child who does not yet know his own worth to the copper, walking echoing halls that have already priced him. Power in Westeros often turns on a single exhausted man making a single tired choice at the wrong moment. In canon, Ned Stark makes the right wrong choice. He leaves Jon Snow in Winterfell, a bastard in name and treatment, insulated from court by leagues of snow and by the ignorance of southern lords. Ned rides south alone to serve as hand, walks into Lannister teeth, and dies in the yard of the Red Keep, while the boy he guarded from a distance drills in the cold with a wooden sword. Here, the ledger shifts by one line. Robert Baratheon still comes north with his queen and his golden lions, still bellows for Ned to be his hand, still walks Winterfell's crypts, and stands before Lyanna's statue with wine on his breath and grief in his bones. But this Robert has had a worse night on the King's Road than usual. A dead camp follower, a frightened child, a fleeting glimpse of his own bastards' faces, and the quiet realization that his dynasty is already rotting from within. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. A king, he dimly understands, is only worth as much as the sons who survive him. So when he hears, as he always does, about Ned's bastard in the yard, this time he does not only laugh and clap his friend on the shoulder. He insists. Drunk on nostalgia, stung by guilt, he demands that the boy come south. Let him be a royal ward, he says, or call him mine and have done with it. The words are half jest, half confession, and entirely dangerous. Ned's answer is not simple indignation. The promise in the Tower of Joy still cuts his sleep to ribbons. Lyanna's blood and Rhaegar's name are a noose only distance has kept from tightening. Yet distance has its own cost. In Winterfell, Jon is exposed to every travelling eye and every listening servant, while Ned rides into a city ruled by Lannister appetites and Varys' whispers. If the king demands the boy, refusal itself is suspicious. If he agrees, he can at least keep Jon where his own eyes and sword are near. Catelyn's silence finishes what Robert's insistence begins. Her resentment in Winterfell is a constant, low winter wind, never loud enough to break walls, always cold enough to seep through them. She will not strike the boy, but she cannot love him. And Ned knows it. Distance, plus royal favour, becomes in his mind a twisted form of protection. Jon out from under Catelyn's gaze, yet wrapped in the visible grace of the Iron Throne. Put that way, there is scarcely a choice at all. So the royal caravan leaves Winterfell with one more rider. Jon Snow, 13, cloaked too thin for southern heat, watches the red walls of the capital rise from the haze. In the Red Keep, a eunuch in soft slippers adjusts his mental board, adding a quiet new piece beside Joffrey, Myrcella and Tommen. Varys does not yet know whose son the boy is. He only knows that a bastard raised under a king's roof can topple a dynasty. In the next chapter, we see what King's Landing does to him before the Wall ever has the chance. Power announces itself first in the senses. For Jon, it is not a crown on a brow, but the stench that rolls up from the city when the gates of King's Landing swallow the northern party whole, rot and river mud, horse piss and cheap wine, incense from septs, and smoke from 1,000 cook fires all pressed together under a hot, dirty sky. The Crusher people surges around their horses, a living tide that does not part for a boy with no name that matters. The Red Keep rises above it, red stone and sharp angles, and within its walls everything narrows. Corridors are tight, courtyards are watched, and in every passage there are servants whose eyes never quite stop moving. Jon notices that before he notices the glittering armour of the King's Guard, white cloaks bright against the gloom, steel polished to a mirror that throws his own face back at him, smaller, darker, uncertain. Honour here clinks when they walk and smells of oil and metal rather than pine and cold. Robert Baratheon meets him with rough hands and rougher affection. The king claps him on the shoulder, calls him Ned's whelp, and a strong lad, and, when the wine has gone far enough, mutters something about strong sons and bastards with good blood. In the same breath he uses to curse Cersei. Jon does not know his worth, but he understands, even young, that being noticed by a king is dangerous praise. Cersei's gaze is different, thin, measuring, the way a merchant thinks over a ledger and finds a number that does not belong. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. A curl of her lip at Jon's presence, a languid question about why Winterfell sends its bastards to court, and the rooms grow colder. Joffrey learns from her. His cruelty toward Jon is casual, almost bored, a shove on the training ground, a taunt about his mother's name, a command to a servant delivered while staring at Jon, just to prove who can give orders here. Words, Jon learns, draw more blood in this place than swords. In Winterfell, a man's promise is a stone you can stand on. In the Red Keep, every sentence is a blade with two edges. He grows quieter, more observant, storing slights and patterns the way he once stored stories about the old gods, watching who bows too quickly, who drinks too deeply, who dares to look bored when the king speaks. Not everyone at court despises the bastard. Barristan Selmy watches him train with a detached, almost weary interest at first, then with a faint, quiet approval when Jon returns to the yard, before dawn, without being told. A correction to his stance here, a reminder that a true knight's first duty is endurance there, and discipline becomes the language between them. Varys's approach is softer. The eunuch drifts into Jon's path in galleries and gardens, asking gentle questions about the north, about snow and wolves, and what men fear in the dark. Littlefinger's interest is sharper, amused. He sees a boy who does not quite fit the sums of this court, and files him away. A future piece on a board he never stops rearranging. Even as a child, Jon begins to understand the first rule of the capital. Survival is not about being the most honourable, but about never being the most obvious target. He learns to stand near power without standing in front of it. Later, when rebellion and successions tear the realm open, That habit will decide whose blood is spilled first. In the next section, we see how this watchful, half-formed courtier responds when Robert's death rips away the only shield between Cersei and the bastard under her roof. Power notices anomalies. A quiet northern boy, neither hostage nor son, growing up in the shadow of the Iron Throne is an anomaly the court cannot ignore forever. Cersei Lannister notices first, because paranoia is the one habit she has never needed to learn. In canon, she has Robert's bastards hunted through the city with the same methodical cruelty a steward uses to clear vermin from a granary. Here, the threat sleeps under her own roof. She watches Robert clap Jon on the shoulder at feasts, hears the king's booming laughter when the boy rides or spars and measures with cold precision, the way courtiers' eyes begin to follow that attention. Her hatred is not about bastardy as such. It is about inheritance, about the fragile fiction that her golden-haired children are Robert's true-born heirs. Every time the king praises the northern boy's sword arm, she hears a silent question in the hall. If this is one bastard, how many more might the king acknowledge? She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. On one side, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, the Lannister dynasty she means to carve into the history of the realm. On the other, one Stark-blooded boy who might in 10 or 15 years be raised up as a rival banner for discontented lords. The numbers do not favour mercy, yet Robert lives, and while he lives she cannot move openly, so she does what she can. She withholds small courtesies, freezes out potential allies, whispers to Jaime that the boy's presence is an insult, a reminder that her bed is not the only one the king has warmed. In her mind, Jon is already a problem postponed, not a problem solved. Varys, by contrast, is patient in a different register. He has heard too many midwife stories, too many half-remembered accounts from Winterfell of a boy who appeared in Ned Stark's household at the exact moment a Targaryen prince and a northern girl vanished from the world. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. But blood, properly placed, can summon armies from nothing. Varys traces the timing of Jon's birth against the dull, bloody ledger of Robert's rebellion and finds the sums interesting. He does not declare, he collects. A passing remark from a northern guardsman. A scepter's observation that the boy has more of the south in his face than the north. A raven intercepted from Howland Reed that never quite reaches its destination. Curiosity for him is an investment. Littlefinger's angle is cruder and, in its way, clearer. He sees leverage. A boy Ned Stark cares for, in a city ruled by Lannister gold, is a hinge upon which future debts might swing. He imagines a day when he can offer to protect the bastard from Cersei's displeasure, or to deliver him to her as circumstances require. What is left? What can be sold? What can be bought? A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. A living pawn can be revalued and resold. Jon's worth to him is not in who the boy is, but in how many directions he can be pulled. And Robert himself? Robert enjoys. He enjoys the memory of his own youth reflected in a younger swordsman, enjoys the flattery of assuming every promising bastard in the realm must be his. He never once asks why the boy's age matches too neatly with the end of his war, never wonders why Ned, the most rigidly honourable man he knows, would bring a northern bastard to the very court that gossips about his own queen. Questions are work, and Robert prefers wine, so Jon's childhood in the Red Keep becomes a calm surface stretched over deep currents. To his eyes, he is merely learning to move through hallways, to read glances, to hold his tongue. Behind him, 3 adults with very different ledgers are already calculating how dangerous this boy might become if he lives long enough. The next turn of the story begins when the shield they all rely on, Robert's careless bulk, vanishes, and those quiet calculations harden into plans. Honour in the north is a road laid in snow, straight, exposed, and unforgiving. In King's Landing, it is a hallway in the Red Keep, twisting, torchlit, full of doors that do not open when you expect them to. Jon's identity bends to the architecture around him. Canon Jon grows as half Stark, half Shadow, a bastard at the high table, yet never of it, steeped in Eddard Stark's rigid code where a man passes the sentence and swings the sword, where blunt honesty is both shield and chain. This Jon hears the same words, but muffled by distance and stone, parcelled out during rare, careful visits from a father who cannot afford to look too fond. The daily lessons he absorbs instead come from watching Cersei smile with her eyes cold, from hearing Pycelle lie about health, from seeing Varys tell 3 versions of the same story in one afternoon. His first language is not truth, it is caution. The faith of the Seven wraps itself around him as well, not with northern solemnity before a heart tree, but with incense, kneeling knights and septons praising victories that were bought in coin and treachery. He watches handsome lords swear oaths before the mother and the warrior, then break them before sunset when a better offer appears. Southern chivalry teaches him that a white cloak can hide a great deal of rot, that honour is often a tale polished after the blood is washed away. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. In the same way, a knight's honour is only worth as much as the witnesses who agree to remember it. In that mire, he gravitates toward rare islands of clarity. Barristan Selmy, who still believes in the old songs of service. A younger Jaime, before bitterness hardens entirely, who at least mocks the game openly instead of pretending it is holy. With them, Jon can ask how to stand, how to cut, how to read an enemy's stance, rather than his flattery. They do not give him Ned's certainty, but they offer something nearly as valuable in this city: coherence. Here is the pattern interrupt. The North becomes a story he tells himself. A cold courtyard half remembered, a woman's voice he cannot quite place, a name, Stark, that feels both intimate and foreign. It pulls at him, an almost mythic homeland of straight roads and clean choices. Yet every skill he owns, every friend he trusts, every enemy who knows his face is rooted in the capital. To ride north would mean abandoning the only battlefield he understands. So his code bends, not shattered, not sold, but revised, line by line, as if he thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. What keeps the people he cares for alive? Which promise must be paid in full? Which can be delayed, which quietly renegotiated? He still yearns for something pure, some untouched snow he can stand upon without sinking. Yet he learns that a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. If he must trade blunt honesty for survival, then survival becomes its own stern, private honour. And that hybrid creed, half winter dream and half southern arithmetic, is the weapon he will carry into the next crisis the city offers him. Steel is a simpler language than courtly courtesy. It does not care for names, or birth, or whether the hand that grips it is true-born or bastard. In King's Landing, that simplicity becomes Jon's refuge, the one realm where the rules feel clean. He begins in the practice yard below the Red Keep, a dark-haired boy with northern features and southern dust on his boots, trading blows with Tommen's soft friends and the odd-bored squire. Wooden swords first, splintering against shields while the gold cloaks laugh and place quiet wagers. The master-at-arms notes, with some surprise, that the northern whelp returns to his drills after each bruise, not with sulks or excuses, but with the silent, dogged repetition of a boy who has nothing else that proves his worth. Progression follows the predictable rhythm of an army's muster. First stance, then balance, then the slow, humiliating work of unlearning every wild swing the body prefers. When Barristan Selmy pauses on the steps to watch, the yard stills. When he descends and corrects Jon's grip with 2 fingers, it is an anointing. The old knight teaches economy, the shortest path between blade and target, the patience to wait for an opening rather than chase one. Jaime Lannister, on those rare days he bothers, adds something sharper, angles, feints, the subtle cruelty of making an opponent look foolish before disarming him. Courtly duelling, not northern brawling. The result is a style built on speed and precision, on clean footwork, and an awareness of the audience at the balcony as much as the opponent in front of him. Jon learns that in this city, even practice is performance. A well-timed parry that sends a pampered heir sprawling earns more than applause. It earns whispers. The boy in boiled leather moves with the poise of a tawny champion, yet has no title, no sigil of his own. In a court where every gesture is weighed on an invisible ledger, that contrast has its own quiet power. Respect comes first from the men who matter least and see most. The yard rats, the stable boys, the off-duty guards. Then from Barristan, in the form of an almost grudging nod. From Jaime, in a sardonic comment that this one, at least, knows which end of the sword to hold. But respect is a finite resource at court. What is granted to one boy is deducted from another. Joffrey discovers that no amount of bullying masters-at-arms can gift him Jon's discipline. His stance remains show, his courage brittle. Each lost bout in the yard, each forced compliment from a Kingsguard knight is another entry on the ledger of his resentment. A bastard who can outfight most young lords is an asset in theory and a threat in practice. The crown wants him close, where his skill can be pointed outward and under control, where his blood and his growing legend cannot ferment into treason. Varys watches measuring. Cersei watches seething. She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Every advantage must be owned or erased. A boy with no great name and too much talent does not fit neatly in either column. The moment that fixes Jon's place in Robert's mind comes on a hot afternoon. Dust hanging in the air, steel ringing against steel. Jon disarms a taller knight with a swift bind and twist, leaves him on his knees before the whole yard. Robert Baratheon, wine on his breath and nostalgia in his eyes, claps the boy on the shoulder and rumbles that he wishes Joffrey had half the lad's steel. It is half jest, half lament, and entirely audible. Cersei stands at the balcony rail, face composed, hands white on the stone. She knows her own worth to the copper, knows her children's worth to the dynasty, and in that instant she understands that she has not misheard. She has merely miscalculated. And in King's Landing, a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. In King's Landing, brothers are not born. They are negotiated. The nursery in the Red Keep is less a cradle of innocence than an antechamber to the throne. And Jon Snow grows up in the shadow of a boy who has been told, from his first breath, that the world exists to please him. At the beginning, it is merely wariness. Joffrey is golden, loud, and heedless. The true-born heir with a lion's mother and a king's name. Jon is the northern bastard with the wrong hair and the wrong eyes, tolerated on the margins of the royal brood. The younger boy circles the elder with a child's curiosity, testing him with small cruelties and smaller boasts. Jon, schooled by Ned in a quieter discipline, answers with silence, with competence, with the unremarked habit of doing what Joffrey only brags he can do. Disdain does not arrive all at once. It seeps in by degrees, through the servants' flinches and the maids' bruises, through the way kennel boys go pale when Joffrey appears. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. Joffrey learns early that in the nursery his army is fear. He pulls wings from flies, then from caged birds, then from the dignity of anyone too low to answer him. Jon watches, jaw tight, weighing each moment on an invisible ledger, speak and draw Cersei's wrath, or endure and protect what he can. The contrast sharpens at play. Wooden swords in the yard become steel in miniature. Joffrey swings wild, all fury and no form. Jon listens when Barristan corrects his stance. When a bored Jaime Lannister, amused by the northern bastard's intensity, bothers to show him how to turn a parry into a riposte. When the boys are paraded at a small tourney for the court's amusement, Jon's lance rides steady, while Joffrey's shatters awkwardly. The cheers that follow are polite, but they are not for the prince. Cersei's smile freezes. Joffrey's eyes do not. Myrcella and Tommen complicate the equation. They are softer metal, not yet forged into weapons. Myrcella clutches Jon's arm during storms on the black water, trusting his calm more than her father's wine-fogged reassurances. Tommen trails him in the yard, red-faced and wheezing, desperate to be included. To them, he is an older brother who explains the names of the Kingsguard, who shows Tommen how to hold a shield without dropping it on his own foot. Protecting them means, in practice, tempering Joffrey, redirecting his malice, standing where blows are likely to fall. The flashpoints accumulate, a hunting accident, where Joffrey's reckless arrow sends Tommen's horse panicking toward a ravine, and Jon, moving without thought, hauls the boy clear before the hooves crush him. A servant girl, cornered in a corridor, Joffrey's hand raised, until Jon steps between them and absorbs the prince's fury in cold, unyielding silence. Each time, the court pretends not to see. Jon does not forget. By the time he is grown, the lesson is written in him as deeply as any northern prayer. He will never trust crowns, even as he is pulled ever closer to theirs. And when men in silk begin to whisper that this bastard has more of a king's bearing than the king's own son, the nursery's old resentments will not stay safely in the past. In King's Landing, information is worth more than gold, and children grow into assets long before they grow into adults. Jon Snow, the bastard who carries himself with a prince's restraint, does not understand that at first. Varys and Littlefinger do. Varys begins with almost insulting gentleness. A quiet word in a corridor after training with the Kingsguard, a cup of watered wine pressed into Jon's hand during a long, dull feast, a passing remark about how the court smiles at a bastard until he forgets he is one. Each encounter is framed as concern for the realm, that convenient abstraction in whose name every cruelty is justified. Varys speaks of food stores, of the gold cloak's discipline, of a king's duty to more than his own pride. He watches Jon's eyes when he says the word king. Jon, still young enough to believe that honesty is armour, answers him with an unpolished candour that would have had Cersei's wine cup shatter in her hand. He admits that Joffrey frightens him, that the court feels rotten, that the small folk in Flea Bottom deserve better than they receive. He does not yet speak as if he knows his own worth to the copper, but Varys hears the shape of it forming, a boy who sees the rot, and does not yet dream of wearing the crown that would let him cut it out. Littlefinger takes the opposite path. Where Varys offers warnings, Baelish offers doors, a jest about bastards and brothels at the king's table, delivered with just enough edge to test whether Jon will laugh along. A casual invitation to see how the city truly works from the balcony of a pleasure house, where men with high names crawl on their knees and pay for the privilege. A hint that a minor command, a better posting, a new horse, could be arranged if Jon is willing to owe the Master of Coin a favour. Jon goes once, out of wounded pride and curiosity, and leaves with a cold disgust he cannot fully articulate. The women's painted smiles trouble him less than Baelish's easy contempt for them, the way he reduces bodies to entries in a ledger and secrets to coin. She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Jon realises dimly, except that she here is power itself, tallying up lives. His reactions are exactly what both men are measuring. To Varys he is wary but not closed, grateful for plain words, yet instinctively resistant to being steered toward open treason. To Littlefinger he is stiff, humourless, unbribable in the small things, and therefore promising in the large. A man who will not bend often breaks. A broken man can be pointed. Their reports diverge. In the whispering networks that coil beneath the Red Keep, Jon becomes two different entries. Varys marks him as a potential stabilising figure, a northern-bred conscience who, if properly guided, might one day keep a mad king's worst impulses in check. Littlefinger files him away as tinder, a possible chaos vector to be kicked at the right moment, especially if northern grievances and Targaryen blood ever intersect. Yet neither moves openly. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and this boy, for now, commands no army, no name beyond bastard. He is not yet worth killing, nor worth raising. He is worth watching. So Jon grows, trains, listens, and learns to walk the Red Keep's halls, with his hand never far from his sword and his thoughts never fully spoken. Varys's little birds and Littlefinger's informants continue to circle, but they do not strike. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. A dead asset cannot. By the time war looms, Jon Snow is a piece both men have agreed, silently and for utterly different reasons, not to move, not yet. The longer he survives, the more valuable he becomes. To them, and though he does not yet see it, to every faction now sharpening its knives for the realm. In King's Landing, the north comes in pieces of parchment. It smells of wax and stale rushes instead of pine and cold iron. Yet for Jon Snow, those letters are the only doors that still open onto a home he has never truly known. Robb writes first. Blunt, dutiful, describing boar hunts in the Wolfswood, bruises from Sir Roderick's training yard, the small steady satisfactions of command when a steward obeys and a gate closes on time. His ink blots and his spelling wavers, but between the lines Jon hears something cleaner than anything in the Red Keep, a world where a man's worth is measured in kept oaths and mended fences, not in how gracefully he lies in court. Sansa's script arrives immaculate, almost perfumed through the dust of the road, full of tawnies she has never seen, and singers she has only heard in old Nan's stories. She dreams of knights and a golden king, not knowing that her bastard half-brother eats at that king's table and watches the wine spill down Robert's beard. Arya's letters, when Maester Luwin can bully her into them, are shorter, angrier, stained with what might be ink and might be mud, railing against Septa Mordane, against needlework, against the injustice of being born a girl when her heart belongs in the yard with a wooden sword. Together they form a ledger of a life that might have been. Hunts, snow, the feel of a real winter wind on bare skin, gossip about which bannerman's son fell in the practice yard, Catelyn's silence, which is itself a kind of message. From afar, the north begins to harden in Jon's mind into something almost holy. He remembers the chill of his first winter there and improves it, polishes it, until it stands in perfect opposition to the heat and filth of the capital. In his imagination, Winterfell becomes not a castle of damp stone and leaky roofs, but a thesis about honour. The air is cleaner, the words are truer. Men speak once, then act. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. In the north, he tells himself, a name is worth as much as the blood that bears it. This is not accuracy. This is distance doing what distance always does, turning compromise into purity and memory into weapon. Ned Stark, divided between hand's chain and father's duty, tries to correct that from his side of the narrow sea of parchment. His own letters are careful, almost painfully so, full of small lessons smuggled between updates on harvests and royal progress. Duty before desire, justice before vengeance, trust few men in court, and none who smile too easily. He writes of Lannister intrigues in such veiled terms that Jon has to read each line twice, learning early that power in King's Landing is something you glimpse in reflections rather than face directly. Catelyn never writes. Yet, without her open daily hostility, the wound of her contempt scabs over into something duller and more abstract. Jon knows, because Sansa or Arya mention it in passing, that Lady Stark does not speak his name, that his letters are answered by Robb or not at all. The result is not the raw resentment of a boy glared at across a Winterfell hall, but a quieter, more corrosive ache, the sense that he belongs nowhere entirely. Not to the Starks who will not claim him, not to the Baratheon king whose table he shares, not to the Targaryen blood that no one will name. Then comes the pattern interrupt, a raven that does not speak of hunts or songs or Septim Ordain's temper, but of banners called, of river lords arming, of a Lannister host on the march. War, when it finally bleeds through the ink, threatens to reconcile or shatter every story he has told himself. The North, he has worshipped from afar, is about to reveal its own ledgers of grudges and betrayals, its own petty fiefdoms and frightened men. And when that reality arrives in steel and smoke, Jon Snow will have to choose not only which side of the field to stand on, but which version of himself walks there, the King's Ward of King's Landing, or the absent son of a house that never fully claimed him. Power in King's Landing does not fall in a day. It rots quietly under a crown that drinks too much and hunts too hard. When the boar's tusk finally tears Robert Baratheon open, it is only the moment the realm notices the ledger has gone red. In canon, the sequence is almost neat. Robert rides out, drunk and heedless, is gored, and returns a dying king. Cersei moves swiftly, forging her children's succession, tearing up his will and placing Joffrey on the throne. Ned Stark, armed with honour and a piece of parchment naming Stannis heir, attempts a bloodless correction and finds instead a Lannister counterstrike. Gold cloaks bought, Littlefinger's dagger at his throat, and in the end, a headsman's sword on the steps of the Great Sept. Here, Jon Snow is not at the wall while this is written in blood. He is on the hunt, riding in Robert's shadow as a half-favoured squire, close enough to see the king's hand shake when he raises the spear, close enough to hear the laughter crack when the boar charges. He smells the blood in the mud, hears the panicked shouts, watches Barristan Selmy curse his own age as they drag the king back toward the litter. And he understands, with a clarity that cuts, that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. And this crown is about to lose its only real soldier. Back in the Red Keep, Ned's calculations shift because Jon stands within reach. The Hand's solar, once a place for quiet, becomes a war room. Ned does not unburden himself to Littlefinger first. He closes the door on the Mockingbird and speaks instead to the boy who carries his name without his sigil. He tells Jon enough of the truth to be dangerous, that the royal children's blood is wrong, that Stannis is the rightful heir, that the Lannisters will not yield their prize peacefully. Jon is no merchant, yet he thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, tallying risks, a bastard with no title, a king's affection, a queen's hatred, and a northern father in a southern trap. Ned's strategy bends around that new column. He considers sending Jon north with a letter, an escape route, and a living hostage both, a boy Robert loved who might stay Tywin's hand. He considers, and hesitates, because every choice spends Jon's worth as if he were coin. Cersei, watching from her own tower of fears, understands this too well. In canon, she has Robert's bastards called when war looms. In this timeline, one of them has grown tall in her halls, trained by her Kingsguard, admired in the yard. Killing Ned and leaving Jon breathing becomes a risk. The boy is steel now, not clay, and steel remembers which way it was first hammered. So when the throne room erupts, gold cloaks turning, swords rasping, Littlefinger's soft betrayal landing with a whisper, Jon is there, pressed back against a cold pillar as Joffrey lounges on the Iron Throne. He watches his father's men cut down. He watches Ned forced to his knees. And when the Great Sept fills for the confession, he stands in the crowd, cloak plain, hand on the hilt Barristan taught him to wield, forced to choose whether to shout, to beg, or to disappear into the shadows as the sword falls and the realm's last illusion of order dies with Eddard Stark's name on the air. Power is not tested in victory. It is tested in the moment you realise you cannot stop the sword. Jon learns that lesson on the steps of the Great Sept. with his father kneeling before a boy king who mistakes cruelty for strength and a court that smells blood on the air. He has, in truth, 3 choices. He can draw steel and attempt a charge that ends with Lannister red cloaks and Kingsguard white cloaks burying him under a dozen blades. He can shout for mercy, fling himself to his knees beside Ned, make a public plea that brands him traitor to the throne and gives Cersei the perfect pretext to cage him. Or he can stand very still, hand on the hilt Barristan set, eyes measuring distance, angles, the number of helms between him and the block, and do nothing that changes the next 10 heartbeats. A boy raised in Winterfell might die for honour. A boy raised in the Red Keep has been taught that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. Jon has watched the Kingsguard drill, watched gold cloaks shift on command, watched how, when Joffrey grows petulant, men glance not at the king, but at Cersei, at the steel, at the exits. He has learned to read a room the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, counting blades instead of coins. So he freezes, not from cowardice, but from calculation so sudden and cold it feels like shame. He sees the crossbows on the walls, the hound's hand on his sword, Janos Slint's smirk, the way even Barristan's jaw tightens yet his feet do not move. He understands, with the brutal clarity of a boy who has sparred with Jaime Lannister and lost, that a single bastard with a practice sword cannot cut his way through a dynasty in full armour. The sword falls. The crowd gasps. Somewhere a woman sobs. Jon does not. He stands, throat raw from a shout he never gives, while Eddard Stark's head is raised and the realm's last pretence of justice drips red on the steps. That night he does not sleep. He replays each breath of the execution as if it were a battle he has lost and must study. Which guards looked away when Joffrey spoke, which lords smirked, which flinched, which went pale and pressed lips thin. He catalogues them as if entering numbers on a ledger. Enemies, cowards, possible allies. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. His father is beyond his reach. His own failure is not. In canon, this would be the moment he flees north, seeking refuge in vows and snow. Here, the city has already seeped into his blood. The guilt does not send him running. It hardens into something slower, more deliberate, more dangerous. He swears, not aloud, never aloud, that he will never again stand powerless while a tyrant makes sport of a good man's neck. When the castle finally sleeps, he sits alone with a practice sword and a rag. He cleans the dull steel as if it were Valyrian, hands shaking, movements careful, ritualized. Each stroke is a promise. One day, he tells himself, he will be the one giving orders, not begging for mercy. And in the dark, as the rag runs over the blade, he begins to imagine whose heads might one day rest upon a block, and which banners might burn when he decides the realm has had enough. He is still a bastard with no name that matters. For now. He is still a bastard with no name that matters. For now. But in the Red Keep, names are weapons. And Cersei Lannister has never been generous with weapons she does not control. Renly is dead. Ned is dead. Robert is dead. The court staggers, disoriented, reaching for new certainties. Cersei's world narrows to 3 hard points on an invisible ledger. Secure Joffrey's throne, smother the last embers of Stark loyalty, and ensure that no wandering shard of Robert's blood becomes a banner men might rally to. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and she intends that army to wear crimson and gold. Jon Snow is an inconvenience precisely because he is not important enough on parchment. A northern bastard, raised under her roof, half forgotten by most lords who never saw him at Robert's table, yet known to the small folk as the quiet boy who trained with the Kingsguard and called the dead hand father, with his eyes if not his tongue. He is a reminder that Robert had other sons, that the Baratheon name once meant more than paint on a boy king's sigil. Her choices are brutally simple. Have him executed at once, a clean stroke that sends Robb Stark a message carved in bone. Keep him as a hostage, a northern pawn to hold against the young wolf's rashness. Or try to turn him to grind down Stark honour and temper it into a loyal sword that answers to Lannister command. She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. What is left? What can be sold? What can be bought? Killing him outright tempts her. It always does. But even Cersei can count. Robert had been fond of the boy in his boisterous, careless way. The gold cloaks remember that. The kitchens remember that. The streets remember the king clapping a dark-haired youth on the shoulder and calling him good lad before a hunt. To spill that blood now risks whispers that Joffrey fears comparison. And in the shadows, Varys murmurs of waste, of the folly of discarding a trained fighter who might yet be aimed, with care, at more dangerous foes. So a compromise is born, thin and elegant as a dagger. Jon is not sent north, nor thrown in a dungeon. He is kept close, granted a minor knighthood or sworn as a personal guard to the royal household, paraded in mail rather than chained in irons. His movements are restricted, his letters watched, his friends chosen for him. His sword, however, is still sharpened and used. The pattern breaks for a moment. Imagine the small council chamber, Cersei's disdain, Pycelle's wheeze, Littlefinger's amused calculation, and Varys, all soft hands and softer voice, suggesting that a hostage who can also stand in front of a king when arrows fly is worth more than a head on a spike. Jon becomes a gilded prisoner. He trains in the yard, stands his turn on the steps below the Iron Throne, and, on rare occasions, is asked his opinion on northern tempers or northern roads. Each answer is a calculation between survival and self-betrayal. Each bow to Joffrey's cruelty files another edge on the quiet rage that Ned Stark's son carries in his bones. For now, the Lannisters believe they have caged him. They will discover in time that cages are measured in loyalties, not in iron. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. In the weeks after Ned Stark's execution, the Lannisters discover that a dead hand is not enough to steady a realm already cracking along every fault of blood and memory. The Ravens fly first to Winterfell, then are diverted south and west, chasing a moving target named Robb Stark. What reaches the young wolf at Riverrun is not a single clean message, but a tangle. Confirmation of his father's death, rumours of Sansa's betrothal, whispers that Arya is missing, and buried in a careful line from Pycelle's quill, the assurance that Lord Eddard's ward, Jon Snow, remains in loyal service at court under his grace, the new king. It is framed as stability, as proof that the Lannisters are merciful jailers. To Robb it reads as chains. His council chamber becomes a ledger of impossible columns. On one side, march south, as in the tale already told, to break the western host, cross the neck, and trade victories for leverage until his sisters are safe and Joffrey's head is on a spike. On the other, recognise that every mile he advances is a mile in which a boy in the Red Keep can be paraded to the battlements, named Traitor's Kin, and hanged for a message. Jon is suddenly both hostage and asset, a brother whose presence in King's Landing might open gates or slit throats from within. Catelyn Stark watches her son weigh this and says less than she feels. Her history with the bastard of Winterfell is a quiet wound. She has never pretended otherwise. To her, Jon's service at court is, coldly, a piece on the board. If the Lannisters mean to use him as a shield, that makes him a bargaining chip. If he can be turned into a dagger in their ribs, so much the better. She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, measuring worth in hostages, bridges and oaths, and she does not flinch from the arithmetic that risks one bastard to save 2 daughters and a kingdom's future. Robb does flinch. Every report of Joffrey's cruelty lands heavier because he can picture Jon there, jaw tight, forced to bow. The Northern Lords, watching, divide in their own calculations. Great John Umber snorts that a boy raised at court will be bent to a king's will and must be written off before he is turned against them. Others, more cautious, see a different possibility. If Robb falls, the North may yet need a Stark-blooded heir who understands both winter and the ways of the South, a commander trained beside the Kingsguard rather than in the practice yard at Winterfell. Put that way, there is scarcely a choice at all. There is only a war with an extra thread knotted through it. Every route, every parley, every risk taken or refused must now answer two questions. Does this bring Robb closer to freeing his sisters? And does it rescue or neutralise the brother in chains before the Lannisters can remake him into a weapon of their own dynasty? A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. Robb Stark is about to learn how many he can afford when his own blood stands on the other side of the gate. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. Tywin Lannister understands this with a clarity that borders on cruelty, and as Robb Stark's banners burn their way through the Riverlands, he begins to measure Jon Snow not as a hostage, not as a nuisance, but as a potential column under the Lannister throne. Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell raised beneath the shadow of the Red Keep, has become something inconvenient. Robert's favoured protégé, trained by the Kingsguard, spoken of in the barracks and the wine sinks as the one Stark who knows this court. In Tywin's private ledger of threats and assets, those three facts do not cancel one another. They demand conversion. If the wolf cannot be skinned, perhaps it can be collared. So the offer is drafted with the same precision he once applied to the Reynes and the Tarbecks. A modest lordship carved from crown lands recently confiscated from some lesser traitor, a minor title that gives Jon a name other than Bastard, and seats him among the king's sworn men, perhaps even the hint of a future marriage to a pliable Westerman girl with good hips and no powerful uncles. In return, public fealty to King Joffrey, a clear disavowal of Robb's rebellion, and a promise I witnessed and recorded that Jon Snow will stand in the hall when the crown pronounces sentence on the young wolf. On parchment, it is generous. In truth, it is a test. What is left? What can be sold? What can be bought? Tyrion is given the task of presenting it, not because Tywin trusts his son's conscience, but because he trusts his tongue. The imp finds Jon in a quiet gallery above the training yard, watching Lannister men drill with the same distant concentration he once turned on falling snow in Winterfell's Godswood. Tyrion does not flatter him. He sketches the war as it is. Robb outnumbered, the north far, winter nearer than any raven will admit. He paints the rebellion not as treason but as tragedy. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected, he suggests, if one Stark-blooded sword remains at court to argue for mercy when the ledgers of vengeance are tallied. Jon listens, and the conflict is not subtle. Safety, recognition, the power to shield Sansa and Arya if they live, perhaps even to restrain Joffrey's worst impulses in those rare moments when the boy king remembers the brother who bested him in the yard. Against that, his father's memory, Robb's banners, the old words about honour spoken over Winterfell's cold stones. He has learned to think the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, weighing worth against cost, blood against name. He does not accept. He does not refuse. Instead, he asks for time, for more detail, for the exact wording of the oaths. And in that stalling, in that instinct to negotiate the terms of his own leash, the game shifts. The Lannisters believe they are buying a wolf in lion's colours. What they are actually doing is teaching him how to haggle over crowns. The next move will not belong to Tywin alone. Power, to Jon, stops being an abstraction the first time he reads of Robb's banners gathering in the snow while a gold cloak quietly kicks a starving boy in a flea-bottom alley. The letters reach him in dribs and drabs, carried by men who bow too low to the Lannisters and not quite enough to the king. Robb at the Whispering Wood, Robert Oxcross, Karstark and Umber and Mormont, answering the direwolf as if the old kings of winter had risen in their blood. In his mind, the north becomes clean again. Hard men on hard ground. An army called not by coin, but by oaths, marching beneath a banner that needs no explanation. Honour there is not a word in a septon's mouth. It is the thing that keeps your neighbour from cutting your throat in the dark. King's Landing offers him other lessons. He sees Joffrey's court reward cruelty dressed as courage. His lies polished in the small council chamber until they shine brighter than truth. The City Watch shakes down merchants at the gate, sells justice by the pouch, turns its cloaks as easily as a man turns his collar against the wind. A bastard who listens learns quickly that in the capital, a name is a weapon and an accusation, and that the line between them depends on who commands the scribes. Here, a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. He watches Pycelle murmur about loyalty while quietly counting Lannister spears, sees Littlefinger smile through every shortage and think the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Grain, gold, gossip, all rendered into columns of profit and risk. Truth is not sacred, it is negotiable. That dual education carves him. From the north, even at a distance, he inherits the idea that worth is measured in kept oaths and shared winters. From the south, he absorbs that survival belongs to those who bend first and complain later. He can imagine a Karstark lord refusing to kneel even with a sword at his throat. He can also imagine Cersei ordering the throat cut and blaming the corpse for treason. Both visions feel real. Both feel instructive. Then the pattern breaks. One night, passing through the barracks, he hears a gold-cloaked captain boast that a riot can be started or stopped for the right purse. The next morning, he reads of Robb hanging deserters himself, with no middleman to sell the rope twice. The contrast does not comfort him. It clarifies him. He begins, uneasily, to see himself as a bridge, or perhaps as a blade. A man who could carry northern integrity into southern institutions, insist that a watchman's honour matter as much as his wage. Or a man who could bring southern realpolitik to the north, teaching lords who trust in snow and steel that information too can be an army. It is an advantage. It is a wound. Because whichever world he serves fully, the other will call it betrayal. And the realm is already preparing to ask him to choose. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. A vow, in contrast, is only worth as much as the boy who believes it will save him. In the canon tale, Jon Snow believes. The wall, to that boy in Winterfell's yard, is not a penal colony. It is a sanctuary with better stories. Catelyn's coldness turns corridors into a gauntlet. His bastard name makes every hall an exercise in invisible bruises. So he clings to old Nan's tales of a noble brotherhood, to Benjen's quiet competence, to the illusion that if he sheds inheritance, he will finally possess worth. The Night's Watch is escape, identity, and penance, all wrapped in black wool. King's Landing strips those illusions early. This Jon grows up watching oaths traded in the small council chamber as if they were coins on a tavern table. He sees Kingsguard, white cloaks, stained by Robert's indifference, by Jaime's sardonic contempt, by the quiet knowledge that a king can drink away the value of any promise. He may be a bastard, but he is not an unseen one. He eats at a king's board, hears a queen's barbs, and learns that institutions are masks worn by men who are, at best, tired, and at worst, predators. Catelyn's hostility is distant gossip, not a daily wound. His outsider status is subtler, more poisonous. He is close enough to power to smell it on his clothes, never close enough to claim it. Varys studies him as an entry on a ledger. Cersei watches him the way a cat watches a half-grown hound. He learns very early that brotherhoods are negotiated, not sworn. So what could still drive such a boy to the wall? Not romance, calculation. Cersei, once Joffrey's cruelty hardens and Robert's health fails, may decide that one more northern-blooded male near the throne is one more risk she does not need. A black cloak is cheaper than a quiet assassination, and more respectable than a dagger in a brothel. She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Remove the liability, pay in honour, keep her hands ostensibly clean. Tyrion, if he has taken a grudging interest in the boy, might dress it as mercy. A bargain. Leave this viper's nest, take the black, and in return he will ensure the journey is swift, funded, and unobserved by knives in the dark. Or Jon himself, wading through the moral sewage of the court after Robert's death, may decide that a life spent guarding a crumbling ice wall is less degrading than one spent watching children murdered for claims. If he does not go, the wall loses its most disruptive Lord Commander. No wildling alliance, no shattered pattern of centuries-old hatred, no southern letters that treat the watch as more than a rumour. The dead still come. The leadership that meets them is older, narrower, obedient to precedent. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. But once the wrong man is elected at Castle Black, the correction may arrive on a tide of blue-eyed corpses instead of ravens. If he does go, he arrives harder, more suspicious, less willing to kneel to tradition. He may bend the institution faster, or break it sooner. Either way, the wall's timeline has shifted. The realm's thin line against the dark now depends on whether a boy raised beneath the Red Keep decides that his last refuge is stone and ice, or if he has merely miscalculated where his duty truly lies. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. At the wall, there is no crown, only black cloth and oaths, and yet in canon, Jon Snow becomes precisely that missing pillar, the quiet centre that keeps a crumbling institution from falling into the sea. Remove him, keep him in King's Landing under the Red Keep's shadow, and the ledger of the Night's Watch changes at once. Jorah Mormont still rides for the fist of the First Men, still drags the Order north in one last attempt at relevance, but he does it without the bastard who kills the White in his chambers, without the young officer who pushes him to see the wildlings as an army, not a rabble. The old bear is brave, dutiful, and tired. He is also surrounded by men who think more about discipline and precedent than about survival. In that vacuum, Alliser Thorne's narrow cruelty and Janos Slynt's city-bred cowardice gain weight. Thorne sees wildlings as vermin to be culled, not allies to be bargained with. Slynt, who once commanded gold cloaks in a hungry capital, understands power only as something imposed downward, never shared. When Mance Rayder gathers his tens of thousands, there is no Jon to suggest parley, no man who has slept in a wildling tent and understood that they are fleeing, not invading. The great ranging still rides, but it rides blinder, without Jon's insistence on ghost, on dragonglass, on warning. The fist becomes not a desperate stand, but a massacre. The survivors who stagger back to Cruster's Keep are fewer, more broken, more ready to turn on each other. There, in that rancid hall of pigs and fear, the mutiny comes earlier and it comes bloodier. Mormont dies not at the end of a slow erosion of authority, but in the first sharp crack of it. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. The Night's Watch does not correct this one. In the chaos that follows, command falls not to a reluctant visionary with Stark blood, but to petty men with long memories and short horizons. The fragile alliance with the Free Folk never materialises. Instead, the wall faces a unified, terrified horde on one side, and the dead on the other, with no bridge between. And in the south, the one figure who might have carried truth between ice and court remains entangled in the Game of Thrones. Jon, with a foot in both worlds, never stands in a king's hall to say, with the weight of his own name and scars, what marches in the dark. The ravens that do come speak of monsters and walking corpses. In a capital where every rumour is a weapon, such messages are treated as one more ploy. She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Margery measures grain, fleets, and banners, not blue eyes in the snow. The realm grows better at winning councils, at trimming rival branches from the dynasty's tree. It grows worse at preparing for the only war that truly matters. The bill for that misallocation of worth will come due. The question is whose door the dead will knock on first. The bill does not arrive at King's Landing first. It arrives at a black gate in the far north, where a young man in sable and mail studies another failing institution and recognises the pattern at once. Jon Snow rides through the tunnel beneath the wall not as the wounded, honour-drunk boy of Winterfell, but as a creature of the Red Keep, a bastard who has watched small council sessions from the shadows, heard Varys whisper, seen Cersei turn oaths into weapons. He looks at Castle Black's crumbling towers, its empty yards, its thin, quarrelling garrison, and understands that the Night's Watch is simply a poorer, colder court. The same ledgers of power and worth apply, only the currency changes. Sir Alliser Thorne tries the usual barbs. In canon, they bite. Here they do not. Jon has been needled by Lannisters at feast tables, dressed down by Robert in drink, measured, and found wanting by Cersei's golden, contemptuous gaze. A bitter knight calling him Lord Snow is background noise. He answers Thorne with a politeness sharpened just enough to draw blood, then files the man away in his mind as an obstacle to be managed rather than an enemy to be fought. Jorah Mormont fares better. Jon has watched old men at court cling to relevance by trading on memory and name. The old bear, by contrast, spends his dwindling capital on patrols, on ravens, on hard questions about the cold woods to the north. Jon recognises a commander trying to keep an army from dissolving into a relic. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. A wall is only worth as much as the men who will stand on it when the dead come. He offers Mormont not just obedience, but information, small southern insights, quiet reports on which brothers bend, which break. Among the recruits, his tactics shift as well. He does not erupt when they mock him. He has seen Joffrey's tantrums turn mockery into sport. Instead, he trades favours. A word in the steward's ear for better boots. An afternoon of sword drills in exchange for a night on the kitchen's good side. He begins, almost without thinking, to build a network. Not friends, assets. That is why Samwell Tarly interests him. In the original tale, Jon defends Sam from cruelty because it is wrong. Here, he also hears the name Tarly and remembers a reach banner in Robert's rebellion, a hard-eyed lord at court, a competent army in green and gold. Sam has read histories Jon has only heard muttered in council chambers. He thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Sam is not only a man to be protected, but a repository of knowledge and a tenuous thread back into the politics of the South. And when the wildlings appear not as stories, but as desperate, organised peoples on the far side of the ice, this Jon does not merely see raiders. He sees numbers. He sees potential scouts, guides, a buffer state against the true enemy. Wildling chiefs become, in his mind, minor lords at a rough, frozen court. He remembers how the Lannisters squandered half the realm's strength by insisting on names and kneelings, and he resolves not to repeat that miscalculation. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. So if this King's Landing Jon rises to Lord Commander, he rules colder. He rotates officers to break factions, trades passage through the wall for oaths, threatens deserters with southern extradition rather than mere hanging. The old brothers whisper that he has turned their order into a tool of kings. They are not entirely wrong. He has merely miscalculated their nostalgia. Yet the watch begins, slowly, to function again. Fewer empty cells, more full quivers, ravens flying not in panic but in planned intervals. He is less beloved, more feared, and far more effective at turning the watch from crumbling monument into instrument. An instrument held, for the first time in centuries, by hands that understand both spears in the snow and knives in the dark. The question is whether the realm, drunk on its southern victories, will notice what he is building before it needs him. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. In the War of the Five Kings, that army is no longer a simple ledger of banners and grain. It now includes one quiet, dangerous variable raised in the shadow of the Red Keep. The realm fractures along familiar fronts. Robb Stark drives south through the Riverlands, his wolf banners a promise of northern vengeance. Stannis broods at Dragonstone, counting ships and sins, while Renly turns the Reach into a tawny ground with a throne at the end of it. Balon Greyjoy smells weakness and sends iron-born raiders against empty northern shores. And in King's Landing, the Lannisters clutch the capital with gold cloaks, sellswords, and the illusion that the boy on the Iron Throne is more than a gilded hostage to his grandfather's will. Into this, Jon stands at court as a piece that can be moved 3 different ways. Cersei, who knows her own worth to the copper and everyone else's to the halfpenny, sees him first as a hostage, Stark blood under her hand, a quiet reminder to the young wolf that his sisters are not his only vulnerability. Joffrey, preening and eager to play at war, can be pushed to honour his father by giving the northern bastard a command in his name. And Varys, watching from the walls and the wells, understands that a bastard who walks both training yard and council chamber can also be turned into a listening post aimed north if Joffrey names Jon to lead men on the Blackwater or in Riverland forays. The boy who learned from Barristan and watched Ned die will not suddenly become the Mountain. He will enforce order, not spectacle. He will hang looters instead of encouraging them, will take hostages instead of burning villages that might feed his own soldiers. Small folk who know kings only as distant names will remember a dark-haired commander who pays for grain, who buries the dead, who reigns in Lannister cruelty when he can. Hardliners, Cersei foremost among them, will see something far more troubling. A Stark-blooded officer earning loyalty in Joffrey's colours. The alternative is quieter and, in its way, more lethal. Jon attends councils, hears whispers of Tywin's movements, watches ravens depart for Casterly Rock. A few words folded into a letter, a merchant lost on the road. A message that reaches Robb through a web Varys has spun over years. Suddenly, the young wolf avoids a trap at Harrenhal, or strikes a Lannister supply train a week earlier than expected. Jon tells himself he is only correcting a miscalculation, that a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. The corpses still pile up on the other side. In either path, every clash in this war now carries his shadow. Each siege, each ambush, each retreat must account for a Stark-blooded strategist who has learned northern honour at a Winterfell hearth and southern deceit in a King's Landing hall. The board has not changed, but one piece has stopped moving as expected. The question is, who notices first? The lions in the capital or the wolves in the field? A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. On the night Stannis Baratheon's fleet ghosts through the Blackwater of Blackwater Bay, that army is thin, hungry, and commanded by men who do not trust their king. The wildfire sits in green casks beneath the tide. Tyrion Lannister paces with ink-stained fingers and a racing mind, and somewhere above them, Cersei is already rehearsing defeat, wine cup in hand, children and poison within reach. Jon Snow stands on the walls. He is not the king's blood, not in any name the court will speak aloud, but in the torchlight he is the figure the common soldiers watch. Joffrey preens and shouts from a safe tower until the first stones fall and the first men scream. Then he is spirited away, all gold and panic. Jon remains, helm under his arm, sword bare, the air around him dense with salt and the metallic taste of fear. He moves along the parapet with a measured calm that is half Ned Stark's memory and half the drilled discipline of a Southron garrison. The plan is Tyrion's. The chain, the wildfire, the feigned weakness. Jon listens in the small council chamber as the imp traces arcs over a rough map, and he nods, not because he relishes burning men alive, but because he understands that power, in this city, is measured in whose ships still float at dawn. Yet he argues for order within the chaos. He insists on clear lanes left open for retreat, on signal calls for evacuation before the green fire blooms, on keeping the worst of the inferno away from the crowded shore. When Tyrion volunteers to lead the sortie, Jon does not step back. He steps past him. He offers himself for the vanguard, not from recklessness, but from a cold arithmetic learned between ledger and training yard. His death would be a blow, but his example might be worth 100 men who do not break. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. A routed army cannot. Tyrion, who thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, sees the same numbers, and with a grimace, accepts the bargain. On the mud and blood of the shore, Jon earns a different name. He pulls a burned man from the water, he orders prisoners taken instead of butchered, he cuts down a knight reaching for a fleeing boy, and does not linger to boast. There is no cruelty in him that the crowd can see, only hard necessity. By dawn, the tale running through the alleyways has already diverged from the official proclamation. The king hid, the dwarf schemed, the northern bastard held the gate. Cersei will try to claim the victory for her son, of course. The singers will be paid, the heralds instructed, the story adjusted line by careful line. Yet rumour is its own army, and in the soldiers' tents and the fishmongers' stalls, Jon Snow's worth is being recalculated. She has merely miscalculated how quickly a city starved of heroes will seize upon the first man who does not flinch. When the last screams fade to crackling timber and the bay glows with dying emerald, Jon stands on the battlements, armour scorched, face streaked black with soot. Below, Stannis' ships burn. Behind him, the Red Keep still stands, red and smug and murderous. He understands with the same cold clarity he brought to the battle that his sword has just preserved the very dynasty that ordered his father's death. The wind off the water is hot with ash. The next move, he knows, will not be fought with steel at all. The next move belongs to Tywin Lannister. He has not seen the boy on the walls, only the reports. A Stark bastard in borrowed plate, rallying green men while kings burn on the Blackwater. For Tywin this is sufficient. He does not need the smell of ash to judge a man's worth. He needs columns of gain and loss. Men are entries. Houses are balances. Bloodlines are long-term investments that must either be secured or, if they threaten the dynasty he has built, methodically destroyed. He has spent a lifetime proving that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. Robert squandered armies, Joffrey squandered fear. Tywin hoards both, and in the wake of Blackwater, he sits in his solar and adds a new variable to his mental ledger. Jon Snow, raised in his city, trained by his Kingsguard, and now, inconveniently, a hero to men who shout Stark when they drink. The assets present themselves with irritating clarity. Stark blood, first and foremost. Even as a bastard, the name clings to him, a reminder that the North once followed his father's banners to war. Proven competence under fire, demonstrated on the ships and on the walls, where panicked gold cloaks found themselves steadied by a young commander who did not break. A growing popularity among soldiers and small folk, who notice when a man shares their rations and pulls wounded men from the mud. And worst of all, from Tywin's perspective, a reputation for relative decency in a court that reeks of cruelty and coin. These are strengths, they are also dangers, because the liabilities are written in the same ink. Jon's blood ties him to Robb Stark, whose rebellion has not yet burned itself out. His very existence in King's Landing, armoured and visible, gives northern malcontents a face to imagine when they whisper in taverns. If mishandled, if beaten, humiliated or discarded, he could become a martyr in absentia, a rallying point for every man who mutters that the Lannisters killed Ned Stark and now cage his son. Pattern interrupt. Tywin does not fear Jon Snow. He fears inefficiency, waste. A useful tool thrown away before its full value has been extracted. So his strategy is simple and ruthless. Keep the boy close, where eyes can watch him and tongues can test his loyalties. Reward him enough. Commendations in court, a minor command, a public word of praise from the hand, to bind his pride to Lannister victory. And in the same breath, sketch quiet contingencies, a reassignment to a dangerous front, a discreet accident, a prepared tale of treachery, should the bastard ever decide that his father's honour outweighs his new-made place. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. Tywin has built his power on that principle. So Jon Snow becomes a line item rather than a person, an asset currently profitable, with Stark blood amortized against Lannister needs, his worth rising after Blackwater, yet always subject to revision. For now, he stays in the black. The moment the numbers change, Tywin is ready to erase him with the same calm hand that wrote his name in. And in the Red Keep's shadow, others are already considering how to move that number. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. Tywin Lannister understands this, and he understands something else as well. An army is only as dangerous as the men who command it. In this timeline, one such man has been removed from the board before the pieces even clash at the twins. Jon Snow is not riding at Robb Stark's side when the music changes. The triggers remain brutally familiar. Robb's broken pact with House Frey, sealed in pride, and then shattered for love. Tywin's quiet correspondence with Walder Frey and Rose Bolton, inked in the same calm hand that now tallies Jon's worth on his private ledger. And the southern conviction that the northern threat must be ended in one stroke, with bread and salt and song-masking steel. Song. Those incentives do not vanish because one bastard is in the capital rather than the camps. What changes is the council Robb does not have. In the canon of the North, Jon is the mirror in which Robb measures himself, the boy who shares his blood but not his name, the one who reminds him, wordlessly, that being a king is not the same as being a young lord with a direwolf and a victory song. Without that presence, Robb leans harder into his own certainty and into Catelyn's grief-strained advice. She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, but her calculations are denominated in safety and children, not in insult and long-term power. She urges peace, urges reconciliation, but she cannot see every knife on Walder Frey's table. Tywin, reading reports from the Riverlands while the Red Keep hums around him, notes Jon's absence from the northern host as another asset. It gives him leverage. When he writes to Rose and Walder, he can promise more than gold and titles. He can dangle the prospect of a Stark Targaryen heir, raised in King's Landing, spared, perhaps even elevated as a useful counterweight to any future northern restlessness. A hostage with better breeding. A future piece for a future game. For Frey and Bolton, this makes the betrayal easier to swallow. The dynasty they help butcher at the twins is not entirely extinguished. A branch, carefully pruned and grafted to Lannister interests, survives in the capital. Rose, ever patient, understands that a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. If the Lannisters fall, a living Stark with Targaryen blood in their custody is a hedge against the next storm. And so the Red Wedding still happens. The doors close, the musicians reach for crossbows, the young wolf dies with a sword at his side and his crown rolling in the rushes. In King's Landing, the news reaches Jon as another piece of court gossip, delivered with false solemnity and thinly veiled satisfaction. His guilt over Ned's death, already a constant ache, hardens into something narrower, colder. He survived where Robb did not through merit, but through Lannister arithmetic. He knows his own worth to the copper now, and he understands that his continued breathing is a line item in Tywin's book. The result is not open rebellion, not yet. It is worse from the Lannister perspective. It is focus. The boy who once dreamed of the Wall begins to think instead about names, about kings, about which corpses will be required to balance this ledger, and the next choices he makes will not be the choices of a northern son. They will be the choices of a man forged in the Red Keep's shadow, who has watched a dynasty murdered from the safety purchased by his own survival. That imbalance cannot last. That imbalance cannot last. In Westeros, An unpaid debt is more dangerous than an unsheathed sword, and Jon Snow begins to understand that he is now both debtor and weapon at once. News of the Red Wedding does not break him in the way it would have broken the boy at Winterfell's fires. His grief is quieter now, disciplined, a cold thing trained by years in the Red Keep, where tears are entered on a ledger and billed against you by those who watched you weep. He does not howl. He does not smash tables. He listens to the tale of music, of crossbows, of grey direwolves butchered in a hall of false guest rite, and his jaw tightens until the bones ache. Outwardly, he murmurs the expected courtesies. Inwardly, something sets. After that, every memory of a Lannister smile reorders itself. Every easy promise of protection from a king's mouth. Every soft assurance from Cersei that the North would be treated with proper honour is reinterpreted in the red light of Tywin's design. The man who lectured him on duty has arranged the murder of his brother under a banner of feigned peace. The house that calls him guest and kin has proven that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and that any oath, any name, any marriage can be sacrificed to keep that army fed. Strategically, his position sharpens in his own mind. Robb dead, Catelyn dead, much of House Stark drowned in wine and steel, and the phrase suddenly over-promoted. What remains in the North that can claim both Stark blood and a plausible path to legitimacy? A broken boy at Winterfell, scattered children no one can find, and Jon himself, the bastard groom in the Lannisters' keeping. He does not need Varys to spell it out, though Varys will gently. Jon has become an asset. To the North, a potential Stark restored and a rallying point. To the Iron Throne, a hostage with just enough worth to keep the wolves on their leashes. Isolation for him becomes less a feeling and more a strategic condition. He begins to test the edges. A longer conversation than usual with a disaffected Stormland knight whose lands were burned for choosing the wrong Baratheon. A passing word to a Reach bannerman, framed as concern for supply, that reveals how thin their loyalty runs when winter threatens their harvest. He thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, weighing not coin but grievances, hostages, sons. In that mood, even Varys becomes an option rather than a threat. The Spider speaks of alternative futures and stability, and Jon hears, beneath the silk, an admission that this dynasty has begun to rot. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. If Tywin believes he has ended the Stark question at a feast, Jon quietly considers how a patient man might reopen it in a throne room. He walks the corridors of the Red Keep in those days almost as a ghost, present, obedient, courteous to the king, yet inwardly counting debts in blood. Each guard post, each locked door, each wary glance from Cersei becomes another entry in that private book. And when an unexpected visitor arrives in King's Landing, bringing northern rumours the Lannisters have not accounted for, Jon's careful, frozen composure will be tested in ways even he has not yet calculated. Secrets in King's Landing do not stay buried, they simply change hands until someone finds the right price. Jon's parentage, in this version of the story, is not a northern rumour tucked away in a godswood, but a question that walks the halls of the Red Keep in boots and training leathers, eats at the king's table and calls Eddard Stark father in front of a court that measures blood and named the way a moneylender measures coin. Canon gives us the skeleton of the truth. Lyanna Stark dies in a bed of blood, whispering, "Promise me, Ned," while Robert's rebellion still smoulders. The timing is mercilessly tight. Rhaegar falls on the trident, the Mad King dies, the sack of King's Landing ends one dynasty as another staggers in, and within weeks, Ned rides south to that tower and rides away with a newborn. In Winterfell, distance and snow can hide that discrepancy. In King's Landing, with half the court counting moons and ages as if over a ledger, it cannot. Varys, above all, cannot ignore it. A northern lord arrives from a recent war with a baby of uncertain age, calls him bastard, yet guards him with the ferocity usually reserved for heirs, and refuses very politely to answer questions. Varys has seen too many bastards who are inconvenient sons. With Jon under his nose, he can compare the boy's growth to Robert's acknowledged bastards, cross-check rumours from Dawn and the Trident, weigh the dates of Lyanna's disappearance against the fall of Rhaegar. He thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Dates, journeys, witnesses, each discrepancy a red mark that suggests Targaryen blood hidden under a Stark name. Littlefinger, by contrast, does not need the full truth. He only needs a weapon. A northern ward who looks more Stark than Baratheon, who inspires the small folk in the practice yard and the gold cloaks on the walls, is already dangerous. Peter can whisper that Jon is Robert's base-born son, or Rhaegar's stolen whelp, or both in different ears. To the Lannisters, he hints at a rival claimant. To any surviving Stark, he hints at a hostage. If the facts do not serve, he is merely miscalculated. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected with a new lie. The true danger emerges when that rumour, in any of its forms, reaches Cersei. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and she knows her own worth to the copper. She understands that her children's claim rests on Robert's uncontested kingship. The suggestion that a Targaryen heir has been raised in her own hall, trained by her own Kingsguard, is not an intrigue to be managed, but a disease to be cut out. She has already ordered the quiet elimination of Robert's other bastards in the city. Jon, older, visible, beloved by some of the very men she relies upon, is intolerable. Here, pattern breaks. In the original tale, Jon's blood is a secret that threatens him only in theory. In this telling, every year he survives, every tourney victory, every moment he stands between chaos and the king, makes the question of his parentage louder. His name may say Snow, but his blood reads Time Bomb, ticking beneath the Red Keep, waiting for the first hand bold or desperate enough to light the fuse. Across the narrow sea, that ticking reaches her long before she ever sees the Red Keep's red stone. Rumour crosses water more easily than armies. It goes in the mouths of merchants counting their coin at the purple harbour in Pentos, in the muttered boasts of exiles who once drank in Flea Bottom, in the careful, almost bored reports of Varys's agents who have been instructed to notice everything and remember more. They speak of a dark-haired warrior in King's Landing, Stark-blooded. Some say Baratheon-blooded, a bastard with no name that matters, and yet a name on every common tongue. Favoured by kings, cheered in the streets, dangerous. Daenerys Targaryen listens because she has nothing else of Westeros to hold. The cities of Slaver's Bay give her bricks and chains and children freed from whips. The Seven Kingdoms give her only stories. A king who drinks himself toward the grave. A golden queen with green eyes and a colder smile. And now, a bastard in the very city that butchered her father and scattered her dynasty to the winds. She turns the tale over as she once turned stones in the Red Waste, searching for a drop of water. A Stark connection pricks her first. Ned Stark, the man who saved Robert's rebellion by putting a sword through her family's last defenders, now has his blood walking the capital as a hero. Then the Baratheon whispers, softer, more speculative, a resemblance to the usurper in the set of the jaw, in the way he carries a war hammer rather than a sword, in the ease with which soldiers fall in behind him. If true, then the usurper has planted his seed in the shadow of her birthright and allowed it to grow tall. For years, Daenerys has held to a simple equation. She is the last dragon. Therefore, the throne is hers. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and she believes her blood and her fire will call that army to her banner. The existence of another figure, loved by small folk, respected by knights, bearing half the blood of the man who destroyed her house and half the blood of the man who betrayed it, does not fit neatly on that ledger. She feels the first sting of jealousy and is ashamed of it. He is only a bastard, she tells herself. He has no true name, no dragons, no ancient claim forged in Valyrian fire. Yet power in Westeros has never cared overmuch for ledgers of legitimacy. Robert proved that. If the realm is already learning to kneel in its hearts to this northern-faced champion, what happens when her sails appear on the horizon? Somewhere in the middle distance, Varys weighs the same question with far less emotion. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected, and he has no intention of letting the realm rot because one dragon girl and one northern bastard cannot share a map. Perhaps in time, the whispers Daenerys hears grow sharper. Not only Stark and Baratheon, but something older. Something that hints at Rhaegar's shadow on the boy's features. If Varys chooses to feed that fire, it will be because he thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, balancing the worth of one potential king against another. For now, though, she rides through hot foreign streets while he walks marble corridors, each of them training an army in their own image. Exile and fire on one shore, court and steel on the other. They are moving toward each other, though neither yet knows the other's face. And when they finally meet, the realm will discover whether two heirs can build a future together, or whether one must burn the other's name from history. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. As Daenerys Targaryen finally turns her eyes west, she sails toward a realm where that army is no longer purely Lannister red, but tangled. Gold cloaks, reachmen, river lords, and at their centre in King's Landing, a dark-haired commander whose face she does not yet know she should recognise. By this stage, Jon has a place. Perhaps Robert named him a royal bastard in truth, giving him a small keep and a command in the city's defence. Perhaps Stannis, in his grim, infuriating way, has legitimised him for reasons of law and precedent, making him Lord Snow of somewhere unimportant, but very visible. Or perhaps he remains officially nothing, a bastard with no name beyond Snow, but in practice the quiet spine of the capital's garrison, the man the gold cloaks obey when they pretend to obey the king. The hostile version is the simplest. Her sails appear on Blackwater Bay. Her dragons circle over the city. The bells of the Red Keep ring not for a coronation, but for fire. To Daenerys, the man who rides out at the head of the capital's host is one more usurper's dog, a convenient symbol of everything that murdered her father and stole her birthright. He wears no dragon, no stag, only a plain breastplate and a bastard's caution. Jon, for his part, sees a conqueror wrapped in rhetoric about breaking chains, accompanied by Dothraki screamers and unsullied ranks. He has watched too many small folk crushed under necessary levies and too many noble speeches end in pyres. To him, her dragons are siege engines with better names. She speaks of destiny. He thinks of dead children in Flea Bottom. So the first meeting is not at a table, but in a killing field outside the city, where dragonfire meets scorpions and disciplined infantry. Jon's tactics are defensive, measured, shaped by Kingsguard mentors, and the memory of the Blackwater. He will not waste men on glory. She will not halt a charge for the sake of a few thousand strangers. Each measures the other's worth in casualties. But there is an alternative, and it wears perfume and whispers. Varys, who has counted Targaryen bloodlines the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, knows the truth of Jon's parentage. Tyrion, weary and amused in equal measure, knows the worth of a commander who can speak both to northern honour and to southern fear. Between them, they arrange a parley in some half-ruined sept outside the city, where dragon and bastard can look at one another without an army between them. Here, their upbringings collide. Jon distrusts absolute power. He has watched kings drink themselves to death, queens sharpen children into weapons, regents treat oaths as decorations. Daenerys believes, with almost religious calm, that destiny has chosen her to reorder the world. He speaks first of the White Walkers, of a war beyond names and crowns. She listens, but her hand still rests on the arm of the throne she does not yet have. She thinks in dynasties and smashed wheels. He thinks in walls and winters. She knows her own worth to the copper. He barely knows his own worth to himself. When Varys hints, delicately, that their blood may be closer than either imagined, both go very still. From there the branches multiply. They might forge a brittle alliance, dragons and city garrison marching north together, each planning to outlive the other once the dead are dealt with. They might become rivals, their competing claims splitting every lord in the realm, turning the war for the dawn into a three-front ledger of betrayals. Or more dangerously, they might feel the pull of shared exile and shared fire, discovering that attraction can be as ruthless a weapon as any army. And in that last path, where romance and realpolitik coil around each other, the question is not whether they will win, but which of them will notice first that she has merely miscalculated, and that a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected, if it is noticed at all. If the Game of Thrones is a distraction, it is also an alarm bell. In the true timeline, the boy who does not want a crown becomes the one voice the South cannot afford to ignore, because his warnings arrive wrapped in victories, oaths broken for mercy, and hard numbers that even a Lannister must respect. Canon Jon Snow accelerates the clock. As Lord Commander, he does not merely repeat old tales of cold things in the woods. He sends men beyond the wall, returns with dead hands that move, with maps of abandoned villages, with hard counts of how many free folk press against the ice. He drags the wildlings south in their tens of thousands, forces the old houses of the north to watch their ancient enemies shiver in their halls. And then he writes, "To Stannis, to every great house that will still open a raven." His letters are not poetry. They read the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Numbers of dead, miles of wall, years until the stores run out. In King's Landing, that precision matters. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and an army must eat. When John in Black sends word that the true enemy does not parley, even a hand who sneers at northern ghosts must at least calculate what happens if those ghosts are real. Remove him, and the message fractures. The Watch still sends ravens, but they come from old men whose names mean nothing at court, full of omens and complaints about provisions. A Maester in Old Town sighs, copies the words, and shelves them beside a century of similar alarms. A small council hears of unrest on the wall between debates over tariffs and trial by combat, and dismisses it as one more northern superstition that can be solved with a modest increase in grain. The pattern interrupt comes not from strategy, but from chaos. A fishing village on the stony shore goes silent. A half-frozen trader reaches White Harbour speaking of blue eyes in the snow. A letter from the Night's Watch arrives at the Red Keep, blotched, half-burned, carried by a raven that should have died on the wing. Or in a different path, Melisandre's flames show a boy in southern black and crimson, a tide of dead sweeping past a broken wall, while Bran Stark's ravens circle over the capital, trying to find the one Targaryen who does not know his own name. In every version, the danger is delay. Each year spent on succession, on purges of inconvenient bastards, on choosing which lion or rose or stag will preen in the throne room, is a year the snows deepen and the dead add fresh recruits. The wall is not a symbol, it is a consumable resource. Stone erodes, garrisons thin, oaths decay. Power, in this context, is measured in firewood and dragonglass, not in gold dragons. And here lies the quiet irony. Raising Jon in King's Landing may give Westeros a sharper player, a man who understands that she knows her own worth to the copper is the only safe assumption at court. A king's hidden son who can read both ledgers and faces. The realm might bleed less in its civil wars, might even assemble a tidier, more stable dynasty on the Iron Throne. Yet in making the South marginally better at its favourite game, it becomes markedly worse at preparing for the only contest that matters, the one where the prize for losing is not a change of banners, but extinction. The board is neater, the clock is slower, the ending is worse. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. In the world this Jon inhabits, The problem is simpler and crueler. There are too many crowns, and not enough armies left to hold them. King's Landing survives the wars, but it does not emerge intact. The Lannister host is bled white on a dozen fields, its gold consumed in bribes, loans, and burned granaries. The Reach stands resentful and resurgent, its harvests the only thing keeping the capital from open famine. In the north, banners long forced down have been raised again, and the memory of a Stark name on southern decrees is no longer a comfort, but a warning. And across the narrow sea, there is the rumour that refuses to die, a Targaryen girl with dragons, and a very clear opinion on who should be king. In that fractured ledger of power and blood, Jon occupies an uncomfortable column. He is the Stark ward raised in the Red Keep, the bastard who learned to bow correctly before he learned the words to the old northern songs. He has commanded men on the city walls, broken bread with gold cloaks and small folk, traded wary nods with black brothers on their way through the capital. To northern envoys, he is still, inconveniently, Ned Stark's son. To some in the garrison and the watch, he is the rare lordling who listened. Even in a hostile court, respect clings to him, thin but persistent. That makes him dangerous. It also makes him useful. If he throws his weight behind a reformed Lannister regime under Tyrion, he is choosing continuity over justice. The dwarf who thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger might yet turn a ruin into something livable, trimming Lannister arrogance, opening the gates to reach grain, inviting northern input on law and levy. But every Lannister spared is a name the Riverlands will not forgive, and every compromise he signs his hand to stains his own worth among those who counted Stark honour as hard coin. If he whispers north instead, if he backs a Stark-led independence that treats the Iron Throne as an expensive southern habit, the price shifts. The Reach will not forget being cut out of the game. The Crown lands will not forgive their kingmaker turning secessionist. The city that once watched him train in its yards will watch him ride away, and the next time they curse a king, his name will be on their tongues as well. And then there is Daenerys, a foreign queen, yes, but one whose blood matches the secret that has stalked his life. Back her, and he gambles that dragons and distant birth can be tempered by local council, that a new Targaryen dynasty can be bound to northern spears and reach harvests through treaty rather than terror. If she burns, he is merely miscalculated. Yet a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. A city turned to ash cannot. Whichever banner he lifts, someone will call him traitor. The small folk who mutter his name now as a rare just man will watch to see which tax, which execution, which broken promise he allows in the name of peace. In this timeline, his greatest power is not in claiming a throne forged for another man's war. It is in deciding who is allowed to sit it, and on what terms, and how often they are reminded that without him, their crown is nothing more than sharp, useless metal. And as the cold gathers far from the capital's gaze, the question becomes whether the kingmaker understands that some enemies do not care who wears the crown at all. A secret is useful only while it moves fewer swords than it can command. Once that balance tips, it stops being a secret and becomes a banner. In King's Landing, where every whisper is weighed against the worth of a crown, Jon's blood was always destined to be both. The revelation does not arrive as a gentle confidence by a winter fire. It comes as theatre. Varys chooses a moment when the court is already blood-warm with fear, perhaps after a riot, perhaps after a failed assassination, when the kingmaker from the previous section has overreached and she has merely miscalculated. A ragged knight from the Tower of Joy, long presumed dead, is brought before the throne. A maester's sealed ledger from the reign of Aerys is produced. A dying sceptre, once Lyanna's handmaid, is carried in on a litter to speak her last. Names are read, dates recited, oaths recalled. Rhaegar's son, born in lawful wedlock to Lyanna Stark, has been sleeping under their roof for years. Jon hears his own name spoken as accusation and as promise. He has seen what crowns did to Robert, how power dulled the man and sharpened the drink. He has watched Joffrey wield the throne as a child's toy, an excuse for cruelty rather than a burden of duty. He has walked past heads on spikes and smelled the iron tang of blood in the streets after every misrule. When the hall turns toward him, when some kneel and some reach for their daggers, his first instinct is not triumph, it is recoil. He refuses, at least at first. He calls himself a bastard, a ward, a soldier, anything but king. He remembers that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and he does not trust any army in this city. His resistance, however, does not end the conversation. It only invites more voices. From the north come letters, then envoys, lords who see in him a living treaty, Stark and Targaryen, winter and dragonfire in one body. They do not speak the language of prophecy. They speak the language of hostages returned, burnt castles rebuilt, a dynasty that might end the southern habit of marching north every generation. In the south, tired factions in the Reach and Stormlands measure him against Lannister bankruptcy and Baratheon exhaustion, and decide that a new name on the coin might steady trade. And across the sea, Daenerys hears of a rival whose claim, on parchment, stands higher than her own. She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, tallying unsullied and dragons against gold cloaks and northern spears, and concludes that this is not a nuisance to be ignored. It is either an ally to be embraced or a problem to be burned. King's Landing has shaped Jon into something harder than the northern boy we remember. He has watched naive idealists bleed out on marble floors, watched petty sadists thrive because procedure shielded them. As claimant, he moves slowly, building councils before banners, insisting on charters before coronations. He can be distant, almost cold, because he has learned that affection in this court is a weapon disguised as a gift. In one branch, that caution makes him a reluctant but effective king, a man who survives long enough to turn the throne from a prize into an office. In another, it makes him too slow, and he dies with reforms half written, a martyr whose blood stains the steps of the very chair that should have been his. In a third, he looks at the ledgers of dead kings and living armies and decides that the realm needs his judgment, not his crown, and abdicates towards someone he deems more suited. The choice among those paths does not belong to him alone. It belongs to the next crisis, the next betrayal, the next army marching on the capital, and to a threat moving in the dark that does not care what name is carved on the throne at all. A man is not only what he does, he is what the place around him permits, rewards, and punishes. Canon Jon Snow is shaped by snow and silence, by a father whose honour is the air everyone breathes. King's Landing. Jon breathes something else. He grows up where truth is a weapon, not a virtue, and that difference stains every instinct he has. The boy at Winterfell reaches for the most honourable choice first and worries about the ledger of consequences later. He joins the Night's Watch in a rush of wounded pride and idealism, defends Samwell Tarly because it is right, tells Mance Rayder the truth, and then improvises through the fallout. The boy in the Red Keep learns early that a careless word in the wrong courtyard can get a stable hand flogged or a bastard drowned in a wine cask. His first reflex is not what is honourable, but who is listening, who will carry this tale, and what will it cost me 3 winters from now? He watches Cersei smile at a man she will ruin before the moon turns, hears Varys murmur that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and notices that both of them survive every storm. He learns from Barristan Selmy how a king should behave in theory, and from the small council how a king actually behaves when the doors close. The result is a Jon who still believes in right and wrong, but files those beliefs beside questions of timing, optics, and the fragile worth of his own name. Exposure to the capital's hypocrisy does not make him cruel. It makes him distrust banners and oaths. Institutions become masks to him. The Kingsguard can be Jaime Lannister shoving a boy from a tower. The Faith can be a tool for Tyrell piety or Lannister terror. The court can cheer a tourney and ignore a starving alley. He grows more cynical about the structures, more tender toward the people trapped beneath them. A kitchen girl bruised by a gold cloak, a scribe threatened by Littlefinger's men, even a frightened Tommen flinching from Cersei's hand. Those are the faces that move him. His ruthlessness, when it comes, is measured. He has seen mercy exploited in the throne room, watched Robert forgive and then forget until the same man offends again. He has also seen what happens when fear rules too long and too broadly. The whispers that gather, the knives that appear in the dark. So he walks a middle path. A deserter might lose a hand, not a head. A treacherous lord might find his heir taken as ward and hostage, his power quietly diluted. Targeted, strategic harshness, deployed where it will echo. Inside, there is a constant council chamber. Ned's ghost urges him toward clean choices. Tywin's cold arithmetic, Varys' talk of the realm, and Cersei's venomous self-preservation argue back. He tells himself he is only being prudent, that a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected, and then lies awake wondering which part of him chose. This Jon will rarely be beloved. He will be respected, obeyed, perhaps feared in certain corridors. And he will carry, far more than his northern counterpart, the quiet, grinding weight of necessary evils done in his own name. The question, when the dead begin to march, is whether that weight hardens him into the weapon the living need, or drags him down at the moment the realm can least afford to lose him. If his soul is being ground down in those corridors, it is not only by rivals and councils, but by the people he is told he must marry or resist. Change the castle, and you change the faces that lean in close when the candles burn low. A Jon raised in King's Landing does not meet wildling spearwives beyond the wall or red priestesses in distant camps. He grows instead among court ladies, widowed queens, and girls taught to smile with their eyes while counting daggers under the table. He sees Marguerite Tyrell first, not as a distant rumour of roses in bloom, but as a presence in the throne room, poised, attentive, watching the king and the hand, with the same flat consideration Olenna gives a balance sheet. She thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, and Jon, who has learned to read men's worth by the steadiness of their sword hand, begins to understand that in the south, a soft voice and a full sept can move an army more efficiently than any shouted order. He notes the courtesy, the piety, the careful deference to Cersei, and he notes, just as carefully, that none of it reaches her eyes. Cersei herself is another education. He watches her constrained fury when Robert staggers in drunk, when the small council dismisses her counsel as a wife's meddling, when Joffrey's cruelty is indulged, then blamed on her. In the north, he was taught that women are to be protected. In the capital, he learns that they are caged and expected to smile through the bars. His respect for capable women does not soften, it sharpens. If she is dangerous, he thinks, it is because the world has told her that her blood and her beauty are her only weapons. In such a world, his own bed and bride become instruments of policy. A cautious king or regent might bind him with a marriage that looks generous and feels like a leash, a Baratheon cousin to keep him in the royal orbit, a minor Lannister to make him swallow his pride, or if the war worsens, a Tyrell match to weld reach grain and gold to whatever banner he serves. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and an army marches more willingly when it believes it is defending wives and daughters. Yet the very skills that make him valuable also make him dangerous. A forbidden connection is inevitable in a court that trades in secrets. Perhaps it is a southernized Sansa, returned from Winterfell's godswood with her songs burned away, who sees in him the last honest fragment of their house. Perhaps it is Margaery herself, weighing her chances and deciding that a bastard with a conscience is a safer investment than a golden lion with a taste for sport. If she misreads him, She has merely miscalculated. A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. The possibility that matters most for the realm is not a grand romance, but a true partnership. Someone who will question his instinct to endure insult for the greater good, who will temper his growing ruthlessness with a reminder that fear is a wasting asset, and who shares his long view that the dead in the north will not care whose name won the last quarrel in the throne room. In a court that treats women as pieces to be married, traded or discarded, this Jon is more inclined than most to recognise, in the right woman, a co-architect. And if he ever reaches for a crown of his own, it may be with another hand already resting on the same metal, not as ornament, but as equal owner of its weight. Power is rarely a matter of geography. It is a matter of habits drilled into the bone. Jon grows up with northern blood in his veins and southern habits in his hands, and the dissonance never entirely quiets. The godswood of the Red Keep is a pale, stunted thing, yet in its shadow he remembers tales of guest right, of plain speech, of oaths that bind tighter than steel. Then he walks back into a hall where smiles are armour, promises are currency, and every oath is written on water. The North teaches that a man's word is his worth, that you say what you mean, and you stand where you said you would stand. King's Landing teaches that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, that appearances feed fear, and fear feeds obedience. In Winterfell, breaking guest right is an abomination. In the capital, a poisoned cup at a feast is Tuesday. He learns both codes, and worse, he understands both. So when Robb's banners rise and ravens whisper of rebellion, Jon's choices become case studies in that internal war. Does he honour a risky promise to smuggle a northern envoy out of the city, knowing that discovery means his head on a spike? Or does he calculate the odds the way Cersei does, weighing one life against the stability of the court? When a useful but treacherous ally in the Gold Cloaks offers him information on Varys in exchange for a quiet murder, the north in him reaches for the sword, the south in him reaches for the ledger. He hesitates. That is the truth of this Jon. He is never entirely at ease with either answer. When he speaks in council, he is too blunt for the south, too measured for the north. He refuses to gild outright lies. Yet he has learned to smooth the edges of truth, to veil it in half phrases that leave a door open. Is that honour, or only a more palatable form of deceit? Others fill in the gaps for him. Northern lords who hear of the King's Landing Snow mutter that he has grown soft, that he talks in circles and thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Southern courtiers complain that he is rigid, that he will not play the harmless little games that grease the hinges of the court. To one side, he is too sly, to the other, too stark. Over time, he stops trying to pick a side at all. Instead, he begins to wield the contrast. In small council, he lets his northern plainness cut through Baelish's fog of words, using authenticity as a weapon in rooms where everyone else is acting. In the barracks and among the city's restive poor, he borrows a page from southern practice, shaping stories, managing appearances, understanding that a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected if the crowd still believes in the name that made it. He knows his own worth to the copper, yet he also knows how fragile that worth becomes if either world decides he no longer belongs. He is a living border, a walking truce line between snow and silk, between guest right and poisoned wine, forever negotiating not just treaties and battles, but the terms on which he can live with himself. And when the day comes that both North and South demand he choose, the cost of that choice will make every earlier compromise look merciful. A man raised between worlds must choose a god in the end, or decide that all gods are merely masks for men's ambitions. Jon's childhood in King's Landing ensures that this decision is not a matter of faith so much as of observation, of watching who swears by which altar when power is on the line. His earliest prayers are not whispered to a heart tree, but mumbled in the echoing hush of the royal sept. Incense, painted glass, the soft drone of septons, reciting the seven-pointed star while courtiers measure one another across the aisle. Weddings, funerals, royal proclamations, every ceremony wrapped in the language of the faith of the seven, every oath framed as if the gods themselves notarized the crown's legitimacy. A bastard boy standing in the back learns that in this court, holiness is another word for public relations. He hears, of course, of other gods. Half-remembered northern tales from Ned on rare unguarded evenings, or from a grizzled guardsman who once stood beneath the boughs at Winterfell. The old gods are presented not as doctrine, but as weather, silent, implacable, the way snow falls whether men pray or curse, heart trees that watch and do not answer, weirwood faces that never move. For Jon, these are less a living faith and more an ache, a missing room in a house he has never entered. Then the Red God arrives, and with him, spectacle. Stannis Baratheon's lean, humorless court brings Melisandre's fires to the capital's whisper network long before her flames touch Blackwater Bay. Here is a god who does not pretend to be gentle. Sacrifice for victory, blood for visions, an apocalyptic ledger in which every life is an entry to be balanced. When rumours reach Jon of leeches on a king's blood, and men burned for the promise of a different dawn, he does not think of salvation. He thinks of leverage. This is the pattern interrupt the boy cannot ignore. One god who legitimizes, one who watches, one who bargains in screams. Growing up amid the small council's quiet blasphemies, he learns that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and any god who claims credit for a victory tends to arrive after the counting of corpses. In that environment, piety becomes another performance, another costume a claimant to the throne might wear. So Jon treats religion as he treats banners and names, instruments first, intimacies second. He will kneel in a sept if it steadies a frightened realm, stand beneath a heart tree if it reassures northern lords, listen to a red priestess if her flames show him an enemy's weakness. But zeal, on any side, makes his hand stray toward his sword. Prophecy especially does not own him. Each time a priest or septon claims that a god has spoken, this Jon asks the only question King's Landing ever taught him to trust. Who profits if we believe this? And in that quiet suspicion lies the future shape of every choice he makes when omens and armies begin to march together. Power in this version of the story has never been a crown or a sword. It has always been a ledger. Children are its most speculative entries, their futures written in ink that never quite dries. Moved from Winterfell snow to the Red Keep's heat, Jon becomes the most volatile asset on that page, a line that no one can fully price until the realm is already paying interest. At Winterfell, he is trained to think in straight lines, a promise made, a promise kept, a wrong answered in kind. In King's Landing, those lines bend. Honour, under Ned's quiet gaze in the north, pushes him toward the wall. Honour, under Robert's drunken indifference and Cersei's contempt, pushes him toward caution. The boy who once would have ridden to defend a nameless steward without hesitation now learns to wait, to count the eyes in the hall, to ask who benefits if he draws first steel. He does not become faithless. He becomes patient. That is a different virtue and a different danger. The change of climate reweights everything. His stark severity softens into something closer to courtesy, because a sharp word in the Red Keep can cost more than a sharp sword in the Wolfswood. His sense of duty widens to the whole realm. He sees Flea Bottom and the royal court, starving refugees and feasting lords. Yet his bond to any single hearthstone thins. He belongs to corridors, not to godswoods. A useful man for a fractured kingdom, a lonely man for any dynasty that tries to claim him entirely. Blood still matters. In Westeros, blood always matters. The revelation that he is Rhaegar's son does not erase the years spent as Robert's tolerated bastard or Ned's awkward ward, but it does change the columns beside his name. Suddenly he is not only a dutiful sword with good instincts, he is an answer to a question of succession. His worth on the ledger leaps, Gam, not because he has become wiser overnight, but because a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, and his veins now promise dragons, Northmen, and whatever allies he has charmed or outlasted in the capital's poisonous gardens. Yet merit clings to him just as tightly as blood. The skills he earns, reading Varys' silences, surviving Cersei's scrutiny, learning from Barristan's precise corrections, and Jaime's lazy brilliance, cannot be bestowed by a septon or revoked by a decree. When Daenerys weighs him, she thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. One column for his claim, one for his scars, one for the way he has kept a burning city from tearing itself apart. If she underestimates any of those, she is merely miscalculated, and a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected, often at terrible cost. Around him, the women of this capital mark the boundaries of his choices. Cersei, whose power is always conditional, teaches him that a mother can move an army with a whisper, yet still be trapped by her father's name and her son's crown. Sansa, reshaped by the court's cruelty, shows him how a northern heart survives in silk by learning when to smile and when to remember. Margaery, measuring her own worth to the copper, demonstrates that affection and ambition are not enemies, but partners in a long campaign. And beyond the narrow sea, Daenerys proves that even with dragons, a woman's authority must be argued for, displayed, defended, while a man's is often assumed until he squanders it. Their constrained agency narrows his paths, Cersei's fear closes doors, Sansa's caution warns him which not to open. Margaery's soft manoeuvring suggests compromises he would once have scorned. Daenerys' hard-won sovereignty forces him to decide whether he is content to be an advisor, a consort, or a rival king. Each of them shows him a different cost for power, a different currency in that realm-wide ledger. And so this thought experiment circles back to the quiet truth under all the banners and prophecies. In Westeros, who you are is never only your blood, never only your merit, never only your name. It is where you are raised, whose eyes are on you when you fail, which lies you must tell to keep breathing, and what you are forced to survive before anyone ever calls you king. Change the castle that shapes the boy, and you do not simply alter his fate. You rewrite the arithmetic of the entire realm. The dead still march in the far north. Dragons still cast shadows over the narrow sea. But the hand that holds the realm together and the cracks that spread beneath it belong to a Jon Snow who learned early that every promise, every bastard, every crown is just another entry in a book that never truly balances. A single decision at the beginning will always pretend to be small. Ned Stark riding south with one more child, one more quiet boy in a wagon, does not look like a revolution. Yet the moment he presents Jon Snow at court, not as a hidden shame in the north, but as a living entry in the royal ledger, every later quarrel, every oath, every corpse shifts a fraction on its axis. In Winterfell, Jon is a reminder of broken vows. In King's Landing, he is a variable. Raised under the Red Keep's red stone rather than grey walls, he watches Robert drink, Cersei calculate, Varys listen, and learns early that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. The boy who once dreamt only of a black cloak now measures rooms, weighs silences, and understands that his own name, bastard or not, has a market price in a hungry court. Revisit Ned's execution through that lens. In the square, the swords are the same, the crowd just as restless, Joffrey just as eager to prove he is a king. But Jon is not on the wall. He is in the crowd, or in the shadows behind the throne. Does he shout for mercy and die with his father, or hold his tongue and live as Cersei's hostage ornament? One choice turns him into a northern martyr, the other into a useful piece on the Lannister board, a boy she thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger. Dangerous, but perhaps profitable if kept close. At Blackwater, the wildfire still burns, Stannis still breaks against green flame and iron. Yet imagine a Jon who has spent years sparring with Kingsguard, listening to Tyrion, hearing Varys murmur of storms to come. Does he ride the walls beside the imp, buying his survival with courage, or vanish down a postern gate toward the fleet, gambling that Stannis will treat Ned Stark's son as hostage and heir both? A miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected. The wrong escape at the wrong moment might birth a northern rebel, or a Baratheon loyalist with Stark blood and a claim that will not quite die. The Red Wedding, in this timeline, is not an offstage horror, but a knife aimed directly at him. If Jon has remained in the capital, Robb's death turns him into the last visible Stark male in southern hands, a hostage whose worth rises with every corpse at the Twins. If he has slipped north to join his brother, his presence in that hall offers a dozen smaller forks. He could insist on separate camps, sense the wrongness in the music, or die with his kin, leaving the realm to Cersei's children and Stannis' shadow. Then the quiet revelation, his parentage, brought not by Bran's visions but by Varys' whispers, a Septon's record, a hidden letter in Ned's hand. In King's Landing, the truth of Rhaegar and Lyanna is not a romantic tragedy. It is a weapon. Jon can bury it, remaining the useful bastard. He can brandish it, inviting every faction to test the weight of his blood. Or he can do what no one at court expects. Take the knowledge north, where names matter less than the dead walking. When Daenerys finally crosses the Narrow Sea, their first contact is no longer a meeting between a northern lord and a foreign queen. It is a collision between two rival claimants shaped by different suns. Does a King's Landing Jon greet her as a potential ally against Cersei, as a rival to be outmaneuvered, or as a living mirror of what he might have been if dragons had flown over the Red Keep in his childhood instead of crows? Each option births its own small dynasty of consequences. Seen this way, the story ceases to be a straight road and becomes a web. Ned's choice at the start, Ned's death, Blackwater's flames, the twins' betrayal, the whispered truth of his birth, the first sight of dragons over Westeros, all knots where character and circumstance tangle. At every knot, Jon can step left or right, speak or stay silent, ride north or remain south, and the realm pays the price. Which Jon, then, feels most compelling, most terrifying, most honest to the brutal arithmetic of this world. The quiet court-bred bastard who survives by restraint, the open claimant who dares the game, or the deserter who turns his back on thrones to count the dead in the snow? Hold that question, because the next turn on this board forces him to choose. And this time, there is no path that does not leave a trail of ash behind him. Put that way, the choice between them becomes a mirror more than a verdict. Each Jon the story has offered you in this thought experiment. The honour-bound northern boy who still hears Ned Stark in every hesitation, the court-forged bastard who measures every word as if the walls themselves are listening, the reluctant king who wears command as a chain rather than a crown, is less a fixed destiny and more a reflection of what you, as a watcher, believe power should cost. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up. In the north, that army is loyalty purchased with blunt honesty, shared winters, and a name that stands for something even when the man bearing it falters. In King's Landing, that army is fear, gold, and secrets buried under the Red Keep. When you choose which Jon convinces you, you are choosing which army you trust, which currency you think holds its worth when the snows come. Consider the trade. The Winterfell Jon who refuses to bend his oath, who dies on a shield of principle, leaves the realm poorer in tacticians, but richer in the memory of what decency looked like before the ledger turned red. The King's Landing Jon, trained by Kingsguard steel and Varys' quiet questions, might preserve more lives on the field, might even outplay Cersei and Littlefinger at their own game. Yet he does so by learning to smile in a court that would have murdered the boy he once was. Which loss feels heavier to you, innocence or advantage? Pattern interrupt then. Do not think only of him. Think of yourself. The instincts you brought to this story about trust, compromise, and when to walk away did not appear from nowhere. They were raised in your own version of Winterfell or the Red Keep, families that prized blunt truth or careful silence, workplaces where a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected, or institutions that punish the smallest error as treason. When you find yourself nodding along with the colder Jon, or grieving for the softer one, you are tracing the outline of your own education in power. So choose a branch and name it in the comments. Do you back Jon the Kingmaker, the quiet hand behind another's throne, building a dynasty without ever claiming the chair? Do you prefer Jon the Claimant, the dragon-blooded heir who steps into the light and dares the realm to deny his birthright? Or does your faith lie with Jon the wall-focused strategist who treats crowns as distractions from the dead in the snow? Or with Jon the disillusioned exile who walks away from courts and banners entirely, counting the cost in blood rather than titles? There is no correct answer here, no single true alternate Jon waiting to be discovered under the right theory. There are only different angles on the same man, different pressures applied to the same fault lines, different courts testing what his worth actually is. Each version exposes another weakness in the world that made him. Each, in its own way, proves that the boy remains the same. It is the price we ask him to pay that changes. Put that way, there is scarcely a choice at all. Move the bastard, and you move the world. Shift Jon Snow from Winterfell's yard to the Red Keep's shadowed halls, and you are not changing a haircut or an accent. You are taking a weight from one side of the realm's ledger and dropping it hard onto the other. Power in Westeros rests on three fragile pillars. Birthright. The stories men agree to tell about that birthright, and the quiet, ugly decisions made in private chambers to protect both. A crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up, the old players know. Yet an army marches on belief as much as on grain. A boy who grows up watching Robert stumble through council, who hears Cersei hiss over maps, who sees Varys file away every stray word, learns early that parchment and whispers can move more spears than banners. In King's Landing, Jon's worth is constantly recalculated. To Cersei, he is a threat in waiting. To Varys, a contingency. To Robert, a half-acknowledged echo of better days. Each of them thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger, adding and striking his name depending on which rebellion or invasion looms next. The irony is that the boy himself still reaches reflexively for honour, even as the court teaches him that honour is a story men tell until it becomes inconvenient. So this Jon is both more compromised and more capable. He has watched Pycelle falsify reports, seen Littlefinger turn debt into shackles, heard Barristan speak quietly of dead kings and broken oaths. He understands that an army is fed through bribes as much as through harvests, that a treaty is often a temporary lie, that mercy in the throne room can mean slaughter in some village no one will ever name. He is further from the clean heroism Winterfell once promised him, and far closer to the levers that move laws, fleets, and succession. When the War of the Five Kings comes, that tension defines him. Help the Lannisters hold the city, and he betrays the North in truth, if not in blood. Open the gates to Stannis or to Robb, and he delivers a dynasty to fire and famine. Refuse to choose, and others will choose for him with knives. Each path preserves a different story about what he is: bastard, hostage, heir. But each exacts the same price: guilt, lost innocence, and the dawning certainty that survival in the capital always costs something essential. In the end, the image that began this thought experiment closes it. A boy who traded snow for stone, wolves for lions, the clean horizon of the north for the red maze of the keep. He discovers that the deadliest thing in King's Landing is not Varys' secret passages or Cersei's poison, not even the truth of his own name. It is the series of choices the place forces on him, one by one, until the ledger of his soul is inked in decisions he can never entirely wash away. And that, more than any banner he might one day fly, is what truly changes Westeros. The game does not end when the pieces stop moving. It ends when those watching decide they have seen enough. You are still here, which means you have not. We have walked Jon through the red maze of King's Landing, measured his worth against Varys' patience and Cersei's fear, and watched the ledger of his soul fill, line by line. Now the question passes from him to you. In your version of this King's Landing, Jon, what happens when the sword falls on Ned Stark's neck? Does he stand beside Joffrey on the steps? Does he move through the crowd as a hidden ally? Or does he misjudge the board and discover that a miscalculation, unlike a corpse, can be corrected only at terrible cost? Take that scene, the execution in the square, and rewrite it in detail in the comments. Who speaks? Who hesitates? Who bleeds? Then carry him forward to the Blackwater. Tell me whether this court-bred Jon rides with the Lannister host, holds the Mudgate under Wildfire's green light, or slips through the burning ships toward Tyrion with a different plan. When he finally stands before Daenerys Targaryen years later, does he kneel as a fellow claimant, as a bastard who has learned to distrust names, or as the one man who knows that a crown is only worth as much as the army that props it up? From there, widen the lens, propose the next fractures in the timeline. If Cersei, urged by some cold calculation, or by Robert's drunken whim, had married Ned rather than Catelyn, what does that do to the children in the yard, to the knives in the dark, to the quiet power of the North at court? If Rob had bent the knee early, trading pride for grain and steel, does this King's Landing Jon become the bridge between wolf and lion, or the hostage that breaks the dynasty? And if it had been Arya, not Sansa, taken south as a ward, how does a girl who thinks the way a merchant thinks over a ledger of grudges carve her name into the Red Keep's stones? If you want to keep playing this out, do not just click subscribe as a reflex. Treat it as joining an ongoing experiment in strategic, character-driven alternate history, a standing council where each new what if is weighed for its blood cost and its political yield. Turn on notifications so that when the next scenario drops, you are there to test it against this one. And if you need more pieces for your own designs, there are deeper dives waiting. Daenerys' claim and how it collides with a publicly acknowledged Targaryen Jon, Tywin's long game, and whether he bends or breaks when confronted with this new heir, the Night's Watch without Jon, its oaths stretched thin against the dead. Watch those next, not as passive tales, but as raw material for the worlds you are already reshaping in the comments. The Game of Thrones is never truly over, it only shifts to a different board. Here, for this moment, the next move belongs to you, and the question is which piece you dare to move first.